Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's show. As you know, on this channel, we talk a lot about freedoms and personal liberties, whether it's from Brexit to the current lockdown situation to anything else that affects us as individuals and as free people. So today we are talking about Iran. It's a more of an international topic, but Iran matters because on the international stage, it actually affects the West as well. As you know, the relationship between the West and Iran has been quite rocky over the last century. We've had the Western countries, America and Britain, intervening in the past, causing some chaos. And now you have the Iranian regime that's doing the same thing now to the West. Today we're joined by a special guest, Anna Diamond, a friend of mine who was a political prisoner, essentially, but in the eyes of the Iranian regime, there is no such thing as a political prisoner. So she traveled to Iran from here as just to visit as a 19-year-old, and she was arrested. They basically said that she's a spy, and she was in prison for a long time. And then with the intervention of the Foreign Office, and at the time Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary, she was then freed, and she's now back in the country, back in the UK. So let's go straight to Anna and hear her story. So welcome to the show, Anna. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you have a very interesting, let's just say, story where you were stuck in Iran for a long time. And so if you want to give a kind of short summary of what happened, what did you do? Are you a spy?
No. A short summary. Well, it's a bit difficult to put everything in a concise matter because manner because I think a lot of things started way before the Iran incident took place. So actually, the way I know you, we know each other from 8-9 years back with our involvement with the Young Conservatives. And then my study abroad in the United States, and then my a pilgrimage visit to Israel, and then my visit to Iran, and then Iran using all of that against me. So no, I am not a spy. I think I was a very convenient individual that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards thought that they could take on and use for political and financial leverage. But to put it into a summary, it's that in 2014 I went to Iran as a dual national who has never, for the past 16 years hasn't been to Iran, and I could barely speak Persian, so everything was pretty new to me. And yeah, in 2016, after about 500 days of being under a travel ban, I was arrested by the Revolutionary Guards under allegations of espionage and blasphemy. So that's how it started.
Wow. And you were like 19 or something, right? You weren't even like a proper adult.
No, yes, I had just turned 19 when I went to Iran, and I was arrested when I had turned 2021. So I was still, yeah, exactly. I was very young, in my late teens / early 20s.
Yeah.
But they completely, they treated me like an adult because I was above the legal age. But however, they didn't give me a right for a legal representative. I wasn't allowed to have consular advice. I wasn't allowed to speak with my parents. Everything was very much done behind closed doors and in a really just unlawful manner.
Yeah, because there are a lot of stories that come out of Iran. The Iranian representatives in the UN and the ambassadors always say that, firstly, we don't even have political prisoners, and also if anyone is arrested, we treat them really well. But your story is slightly different. So I know it's kind of a difficult thing to talk about, but what sort of things did you go through when you were in prison?
Well, I think Iran doesn't consider having political prisoners because they think that if they arrest someone who has committed a crime according to their constitution or laws, then yeah, exactly. So they are a criminal, and that doesn't make them a political prisoner in their eyes. But also in my case, I don't know if I would be at ease with classifying myself as a political prisoner, because I was arrested on national security charges, but also, looking back retrospectively, it's quite clear that Iran was and still is taking dual and foreign nationals as hostages, and so the legal terms and the jargon that they use is merely to just justify their wrongdoings, rather than to indicate that we are political prisoners. But what I went through, well, I was in solitary confinement for about 200 days, and I went through really severe interrogations lasting anywhere from 10 minutes to 12 hours. And during that period, I was actually the youngest female inmate in Evin prison, which is interesting because even the guards were making fun of it. So they called me Juje, which means I'm actually physically quite big, so it's ironic like that. But so it means like a baby chicken, and. But they would still put me through really horrible stuff, like a forced virginity test to prove that I don't even know why they did it. I think it was just to see whether or not I I don't know. It's difficult to say.
Weird stuff.
I think it was just their way of showing me that they could do literally anything to me and nobody would know. So it's just break me down, and then on top of that, they also did a mock execution, which I think hasn't really happened to many dual nationals, with the exception of Maziar Bahari, a Canadian Iranian journalist. But that was way back in 2009, 2010.
Did you happen to be in the same prison or kind of cells as people like Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and other kind of famous prisoners?
Yes, so after about 3.5 months in solitary, they transferred me to the public ward, where I met very, very smart women, intellectuals and pioneers of their field, people that would probably get amazing prizes if they only lived in the West and did the kind of work that they do in Iran. But for example, Narges Mohammadi, who is the vice president of a human rights group that is led by Shirin Ebadi, who's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And then you had Atena Farghadani, also an award-winning artist. But no, I didn't meet Nazanin herself, because when I was transferred to public ward, Nazanin had just been arrested. So in terms of the timelines, at that point, she was in solitary confinement. And by the time she was brought onto the public ward, I was taken to solitary confinement. So I was transferred back to the solitary units.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talks when it comes to the West and East, Britain, America, and Iran. Obviously, the Iranian regime to consider these countries as mortal enemies, and so it's quite difficult. There's a lot of dual nationals who are in these situations, and some
Absolutely.
of them, like yourself, managed to get out. The rest of them are still in there. Because this happened at the same time as when Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary, I believe, and the Iranian press mentioned that he traveled to Iran and he was having talks with the government on various issues, and so apparently he also helped with your case, apparently, right?
Yes. So my case began in 2014, and then I was formally arrested in 2016. So nobody really saw that coming, that we would be so abruptly taken as inmates into Evin prison. So during those 2 years, I didn't really dare or think of making my case public, because we were just under a travel ban with a series of interrogations at different safe houses. But then when we were taken into detention, I didn't really have anyone outside to make my case public. With a lot of cases, for example, with Nazanin, she has an incredible husband who is running this very wide-ranging and just spectacular campaign. And with us, we didn't have that because we were arrested as a family. But then when I did come out on bail, I was so determined to make the officials known of this incident, and I was, I would email the FCO and the foreign ministries, and it was a one woman show really, because my mom, for one, isn't really that great with bureaucracy, and then my dad was still in prison. I couldn't read or write Farsi. So it was just a big mess that someone had to take care of. And I think that experience really taught me a lot about myself, but also it brought on a lot of diplomatic involvement. So when Boris Johnson, at the time Foreign Secretary, he flew to Iran, November 2017, he came in publicly. It was known that he traveled there to discuss Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's case. But then, according to the national media in Iran, he had brought forward 4 different names, one of them which belonged to my father. And then within a matter of 2 months, my dad was released from prison. So it wasn't something that was spoken of, across international media, but it definitely helped a lot, and it eased my burden specifically a lot.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of theories behind how the Iranian regime managed, especially dual citizens. They say that they use them as tools to, for example, keep like 5 at a time as a leverage,
Yeah.
and then they kind of release one, but then they take another one in, and it's
Exactly. Yeah. Well, because of the really crippling economic sanctions on Iran, the Revolutionary Guards are really making sure that they can facilitate everything they can, and they take really desperate measures when it comes to arresting dual nationals. Hostage taking is like a foundational element of the Islamic Republic, so it really doesn't surprise me that it's still occurring. But it's that with dual nationals, it's either they use us as political leverage, financial leverage, is as a source of revenue for themselves at a time when the whole international community are turning their backs, so to say. And by the way, by no means am I advocating for the lifting of economic sanctions with this speech. It's just merely to show that they really do as much as they can to keep themselves, their heads above the water. Yeah.
Are your family, the relatives they have in Iran, are they okay now? Are they safe?
Well, when I first went public with my case, they raided my aunt's house, and then they also harassed my uncles, and they also went to my grandmother's house. So the harassment was very real, and at one point I was very scared that more innocent people would fall into the same tragedy, so to say, as I did, which, where you lose many years of your life for no reason at all. And I took a pause from that. I refrained from giving interviews for specifically Persian channels, and just because I thought, they are directly aimed at Iranian people, and the Revolutionary Guards would be very sensitive to those. But for now, I think it has toned down significantly. I still occasionally get death threats and bots on Twitter calling me a spy that got away. But I think it's just one part of this whole journey.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm personally banned from entering that country, so
yeah, exactly.
so, yay, Team Spy. So what are you hearing from inside Iran? A lot of people are sick and tired of the regime. They at this point they do want regime change, but it's a bit of a mess because they've been wanting this for years and years. Is there an appetite now? Is there a proper movement that we're hearing?
Well, honestly, the 4 years that I spent in Iran, and just this is just based on my experience and realistically speaking from what I saw, the power and influence that the Revolutionary Guards have in Iran is so systemic and so deeply rooted in infrastructures that it is very hard for me to imagine how, at least in a swift manner, how could it be possible that they would be overthrown or that you could achieve a regime change? And also, looking back at the last 6 months, Iran has gone through a lot. For example, starting with the November, December protests, where people just went out to peacefully protest the increase in fuel prices, and then that turned out to be a horrendous, violent crackdown on really just peaceful protesters. And then you had January with the assassination of General Soleimani, which then, in turn of events, garnered sympathy for Revolutionary Guards, even by the international community, really. And then again, then you had the accidental downing of the passenger aircraft, where 176 people were killed. So you have had a lot of events that alternate the public's perception and attitude toward the Revolutionary Guards. It varies from sympathy to outrage. But with the coming of virus, unfortunately, there has emerged a window of opportunity for the Revolutionary Guards to, quite frankly, just slander the Rouhani campaign and administration. Rouhani's presidency tenure is coming to an end in a year, and of course, he's not allowed to run for the third term. But the Revolutionary Guards are making sure that his legacy will not be remembered, because there is no legacy. That's what they claim. Rouhani spent the first tenure of his presidency securing the JCPOA, and he has spent the second term of his presidency in figuring out what to do now that President Trump has withdrawn from the JCPOA. So if the current events are anything to go by, it could be likely that the hardliners who support the Revolutionary Guards, they could potentially succeed in the next elections, and that is really not good news for the Iranians or the people who are observing Iran's climate and situation from afar.
Yeah, you're right. At the same time, the conflict, internal conflict, is actually a lot bigger than the previous decades. The Revolutionary Guards, the so-called moderates in the government side or in parliament, and generally inside the regime, the divide is now bigger than before. And I know that you're right that
there's like a huge mismanagement.
You're right that as a system is quite strong. It's very strong and stable as a regime, but at the same time, even the Soviet Union collapsed eventually. Nothing lasts forever.
Yeah. This is not to break hopes or say that the current regime will live on. It's just that, from what I've observed, and it really breaks my heart to say this, because I always thought that despite what happened to me, Iran will always be part of my identity, and of course I would love to go back one day very soon. But it's just a matter of what will happen next, because clearly with Rouhani, his administration is completely wrecked, at least by the propaganda that the Revolutionary Guards are feeding to the people. So currently, if anything, I think the ordinary Iranians have lost trust, both for the so-called reformists and also for the Revolutionary Guards and the hardliners. So unless there is a strong alternative put in place very soon from inside, it will be only time will tell what will happen.
Yeah, well, I personally don't think they will last that long. But because the desperation from the people is getting bigger and bigger.
Absolutely,
they got nothing to lose anymore, because previously any movement we had, from the Green Movement to previous ones, it was generally the middle class and the young and educated. But now you got the working class and ordinary people. So we'll have to wait and see how everything actually turns out. And I want to say massive thank you again to you for coming on the show. Any last few words?
Thank you so much. No, just thank you for this really nice interview. It was good to speak with you after so many years, and well, thank you for having me on.